All right, and we're back with Michiel and
Hello.
Bijl. That's the dinosaur.
Yeah.
This may well be a world first. Dinosaur onesie accessibility online talk for Global Accessibility Awareness Day and ID 24.
But not the last.
Definitely not the last. We're joined by Michiel Bijl now, who's one of the recent additions to our crew at TPG. He's got a web development background, so takes things very much from a code and development point of view, and his talk now is going to be looking at some coding best practices using building blocks and explaining why good markup is important to all users. But just before I hand over to our dinosaur onesied speaker, just a quick reminder that if you have any questions for Michiel or any of our other speakers, you can tweet us and include the hashtag ID24, and we'll pick them up and pass them on to Michiel at the end of his talk. So if you get to hit your screen share button, Michiel, it's over to you.
Yep, I will. And there we go. So yeah, my talk is called "Why Good Markup Matters for All Users" on HTML and usability. So let's look at the word markup first, because, well, you know. So markup is a noun. It comes from computing, and it's a set of tags assigned to elements of text to indicate their relation to the rest of the text or dictate how they should be displayed. That is the definition of the Oxford English Dictionary, anyway. So markup derives from the letterpress days, where authors would put like little annotations next to the text to indicate like paragraphs, breaks, titles, all that sort of stuff. So basically indicate what sort of style they should be in. And yeah, in computing we should just sort of carry that over, I guess. In this talk we're gonna quote Carl Gross a couple times, and the current slide says, "What is this thing and what does it do?" Which is a saying by Carl Gross, I'd say. So we're gonna, as Leonie said, we're gonna look at a couple of common design patterns or building blocks. In the first half of this talk, we're actually going to look at a couple of very simple ones that, and how to mark them up. So what you see on the screen now is blue text with an underline, and the text reads "dinosaur with feelings." So we can ask the question, what is this thing and what does it do? So by the color and the underline, we can sort of denote that it's, or we can sort of guess that it's a link, and that we can interact with it by clicking on it, and we can probably tell that we'll go someplace else. So if we click this, we go to a website called rawr.eu, which is rawr.eu, and that shows a green dinosaur with a heart in a text or in a speech bubble next to it. So the dinosaur's name is Gali, if you're wondering. So how would we mark up a link? On the current slide is the typical markup for a link, which is an anchor element with a href attribute with the value of whatever it is you want to link to, so rawr.eu in this case. And within the anchor elements, or anchor tags, I should say, is the text of the link, which in this case is dinosaur with feelings. Underneath this markup is, or this piece of code, is a short checklist, and this checklist is going to be repeated on all slides that have a code example. So the current code looks like a link because, well, we use the anchor attribute or element, and the browser will just style it like a link. even if we don't apply any additional CSS to it. It behaves as a link. We can click it, and we can right-click it, opening a new tab or new window or whatever. It is a link, as in it's exposed as an anchor to in the accessibility tree. So assistive technologies can, well, know that it is a link, so they know how to interact with it. And it's really easy to write because as you all know, the anchor element is just an A, and all you need is the href attribute to make a link to something. So we go to the next slide, which has a piece of code on it, which is a span element with a class of link and a data link attribute of raw.eu, so the link that was in the href attribute in the previous slide. The span contains the text dinosaur with feeling, so that's the same as the anchor element in the previous slide. And then we have the checklist, which only has the looks like a link Buddha checked, because, well, it still looks like a link because we added the class link to it. But it most certainly doesn't behave like a link unless we include all the include a bunch of JavaScript. But for example, you can middle click on a link and it will open in a new tab. That's, as far as I've heard, that's pretty hard to achieve in JavaScript. So yeah, it doesn't really behave like a link, even if we can make it like, even if you can click it, you still can't right-click it to open in a new tab, for example. It isn't a link because we use the span element, and there's no role or anything to indicate that what the purpose is of this element. And as you all know, a span and a div are just sort of semantically meaningless elements. It's not really easy to write either, because you have to, well, first of all, span is 3 extra letters on top of the anchor element. We have to add the class to make it look like a link, and then we have to include a data link attribute to include other data. So it's not really easy, and to be honest, you don't really see this, but you know, it's just an example. So we can add a couple things to make this behave a little bit more like a link. So the current slide shows the same span, same code example with the span element, but this time we have a tab index of 0 added and a role that equals link. So the checklist underneath now has a check next to the looks like a link and next to the is a link. Because of the role, which is an aria attribute, the span is now exposed as a link, and with the tab index attribute, you can now actually tap to it. So somebody that uses the tab key to move through the website can now get to it and yeah, activate it with either the return or spacebar if that behavior is added via JavaScript. So it's not really easy to write, and it still doesn't behave like a link because I still can't right-click it and open in a new tab. So yeah, it's certainly if we go back 2 slides to the first example, which is just the anchor, it's just so much easier to write. So what is a link? Links allow users to navigate to another page. This is from the Microsoft UX guide, which is true. Links allow you to navigate to other pages. So please don't use links as buttons. Talking about buttons, the current slide has a rectangle, a rounded rectangle with a white background and a gray border with 2 words in it by item. From this styling, we can sort of tell that it is a button. So how would we mark this up? And I'm going to do something a little different from the previous example. I'm going to show you first how we usually see this. So a lot of authors will use the anchor element, which is, as we just discovered or just explained, is used for links. And the reason they do this is that they find the button element to be hard to style, for example. So the piece of code on this slide is an anchor element with a class of button, and within the anchor tags is the text by item. Underneath is the familiar checklist, which looks like a button. Yeah, it looks like a button because we added the class button. It doesn't behave like a button because there's no tap index or anything, so we can't even tap to the button. And we can't activate it with the spacebar if we don't add that with JavaScript. It isn't a button, so there's no check mark next to is a button because, well, it's an anchor. We use the anchor element. It is sort of easy to write because, well, it's just an anchor with a class. So yeah, that's not too bad. Next slide. On the next slide, we have the same anchor code piece, but we added a tap index of 0 again to make it focusable. And we also added a role equals button to expose it as a button to assistive technologies. But now in the checklist, there's a check next to looks like a button, behaves like a button, and is a button. So we do still need to add the spacebar activation via JavaScript to make it actually behave like a button. But there's no check next to easy to write because, well, we had to add the tap index and the role, and it just sort of getting complex. So on this slide, you see the code piece or piece of code, which is just a button element with the text by item. And this looks like a button because we use the button element. It behaves like a button because, hey, we used the button element. It is a button because, again, we used that button element. And it's very easy to write because it's just button as an element, then the words by item, and then closing the tag. So we should all just really use the button element for buttons. So what is a button? Use a push button to perform an instantaneous action such as print or delete. This is from the OSN Human Interface Guidelines. So the difference between an anchor and a button, or a link and a button, is really that a link will take you to some other place, whereas a button performs an action right where you are. So it might open a dialog or something, or it might print a page, or it might delete something, or whatever, but it will perform an action instead of taking you somewhere else. Next slide shows the words write a review, and underneath that is a large rounded rectangle with a white background and a gray border. And we can sort of, well, we can tell that this would be a text area. So I'm going to do the same as with the button example and just show you how we sometimes find this in websites. So the piece of code here is a div with a class of label, and then the words write a review. And within that div is another div with a class of text area, and it has the content editable attribute set to true. So because of the classes, this looks like a text area, but it most certainly doesn't behave like a text area. It isn't a text area, and it's not really easy to write. It sort of is, but not really, because you have to, you know, content editable is a very long attribute. Content editable is actually, if you set that on an element, it's actually included in the tap index. So it sort of behaves like a text area, but I'm sort of a gut if it's actually exposed as a text area, but I don't believe so. In any case, you can't click on the label to set focus to the text area, so that's an issue. So we can fix a couple of these things, like we can give a role of text box to the div with the class text area. This will expose it as a text edit field. But we also have to set aria multiline to true to indicate that it's a text area in which you can just press return to add more lines and such. Then we also have to add a aria label to couple the label to the text area, which means we also have to add an ID to the label. So now it looks like a text area, it behaves like a text area, and well, it is a text area, but it's most certainly not easy to write. It's a lot of code. The text area alone needs 5 attributes to function like a text area. Never mind the JavaScript that should be behind it. So on the next slide we have I'd say the proper markup for this, which is just a label element with the words write a review, and inside of that is a text area element. This basically does the same as the previous slide. So there's the previous slide again. You can see the difference in code just to make the same. So this looks like a text area. It behaves like a text area. It very much is a text area, and it's very easy to write. It's just 2 elements. So what is a text area? I asked my dad because I had no other source to find this out. So he said you can put text in there, which I think is a fair description for a text area. That is the part where we look at different building blocks of websites and how we should mark them up. There are many more other examples, but I feel that there are a couple that are often mistaken or often marked up in an incorrect way, and that are fairly easy to fix. Next, we're going to look at divs, and this slide shows a quote by Louis Garcia, which says, "I also hate divs," which is very much true because divs are overly used, I'd say, because divs are used to mark up buttons, for crying out loud. So HTML5 introduced quite a bit of new elements which can add semantic meaning to your page. A couple of these are called lint marks, such as the header element. The header element equals to the role of banner, which is to say that the header or banner region has all your main website, or not your main, your website info, so like your logo, maybe your navigation is in there, which is a separate element, by the way. Just the stuff that's on the top usually. So you can use the header element instead of a div with a class that equals header, for example. We also have the footer element, which you should use over a div with a class of footer. The footer element has information such as maybe a copyright notice, maybe again a navigation to maybe your privacy policy or whatever. Its role in the aria specification stuff is equal to content info, so that might give you some more indication of that might give an indication of what is supposed to go in there. So it's just content info for the page. Then there's also a main element which should contain the main content of your page. So if you had a website, you would have a banner which had the logo and such. Then you have an article maybe which is in the main, and then you have a footer underneath that includes some content info. So there should be only one main element on any given page, because there's only one piece of main content on any page, I'd say. There's plenty of other HTML5 elements that you can use to mark up the rest. So, and also use semantic headings like an H1, H2, H3, etc. And don't do stuff like a div with a class equals H1, because people that use assistive technologies can use landmarks and headings to navigate around the page. So, for example, in VoiceOver, you can bring up the rep rotor and navigate by heading, which are sorted by level. So I can bring up the rep rotor and say, okay, this is the H1, this is a couple of H2s, and these are the H3s that are underneath that. And I actually, even though I'm sighted, I actually use VoiceOver's rep rotor quite a bit because it's just easier to navigate around the page. And you can not only use the headings, but also the landmarks. So you can easily go to the footer or the navigation or the sidebar or whatever. So that's there's a couple of people that are actually pushing for bringing that sort of keyboard navigation to browsers natively, so that you don't have to install any AT, or just to make life easier, I'd say. This slide shows well, a typical layout. The title is "If this is a typical layout." So yeah, I'd say it's a typical layout. It shows on top. It shows a header element, which is so it's basically a big rectangle with the word header in it. Inside of that is a nav, so a rectangle with the word nav in it. Underneath that is a large rectangle with the word main in it on the left, and a rectangle on the right that says aside. And underneath that is a rectangle that says footer. So it's basically just a sort of a blueprint for most websites that are out there. You might switch the main and aside from left to right, but this is basically most websites. So if this is a typical layout, then why isn't this a typical markup? So the current slide shows a piece of code for the layout on the previous slide. So it has the header element, within it a nav element, underneath that is a div with the main and aside elements in it, and underneath that is the footer element. Because on a lot of websites you would see the same structure, but they would use divs with either classes or IDs or well, the classes or IDs don't really add semantic, or they really don't they really don't add semantic meaning to divs or to elements. So you're better off just using the HTML elements and styling those. And it's also worth to note that function doesn't equal position. And yes, I totally stole this from Steve, but he's probably fine with it, I hope. Or he'll light up my Skype in any moment. So the current slide shows the same elements that were 2 slides back. So we have a footer, a nav, a main, and a side, and a header. But on this slide, they're just in rectangles underneath each other. And the footer is on the top, then is the nav, then is the main, then the aside, and the header is on the bottom. So this doesn't really make sense, but hey, if this is your layout, maybe your designers were drunk or something, I don't know. Then please go for it, because function is more important than its position. So yeah, just go with it. This brings us to another important question, which is why is there aria? Because we have HTML, and HTML has a lot of accessibility built in. I could insert a quote by Tim Berners-Lee if I remembered it, but I forgot. He said something like the beauty of the web is something in its universal accessibility, or it should be universally accessible, something like which is true because HTML comes with accessibility built in, and really, if we make a website, we break off the accessibility or break down the accessibility or break the accessibility. The further we go in adding like custom elements and just using divs for everything. So aria is sort of an attempt to, or not, it's an attempt to try and fix that. So a lot of websites use divs for everything, and with aria you have attributes, or a bunch of attributes like the role attribute, which we saw earlier. You have other aria attributes like aria selected and a whole bunch of attributes which you can use to communicate the state, the role, and the name of an element. So there's a wide variety of design patterns that are not available in native HTML. Current hot topic is tabs. So there's no way to make there's no tab element, for example. There's no tab panel element. So there's no native implementation of that. Even though we've had tabs on the desktop for, well, as long as I've used a computer anyway. So that's what, 24 years or something. In any case, other than the wide variety of design patterns, the complex widgets that we do have natively in HTML are very hard to style consistently across browsers and platforms. So take, for example, a couple of browsers have implemented the date picker widget, but you can't really style the date picker itself. So you're sort of stuck with the styling that the browser gives you. And, well, let's be honest, most designers aren't really happy with that styling. So they tend to make something of their own, and usually that the thing that gets implemented isn't accessible, and besides a date picker being very hard to make accessible. Aria is basically a way to make accessible div soup, to put it bluntly. Anyway, it does allow for a desktop level interfaces to be accessible, which is very important. Seeing as more and more applications come to the web. Look at, well, Gmail as an example. iCloud would be another example. There's probably many more out there that I'm not aware of. Slack or IRC Cloud are all examples of basically applications on the web. So yeah, there's sort of the question of native versus aria, because with native you get accessibility for free, whereas with aria you have to pay for it. With aria you need to study. You need to study aria, and it's really hard to get it right. So it needs to be studied and developed by authors. Whereas with HTML, it's fairly simple. You write a couple of elements and you're probably set. Writing HTML is fairly easy, and aria is really hard to get right. I am the co-editor of the Altering Practices Guide, which you can find at the address at the slide, which is http://w3c.github.io/aria-practices, which is the editor's draft. So that's very much a work in progress, but this way you'll at least get the latest version available. I work on this together with an amazing bunch of people in the aria working group, and well, it's just we tend to have a hard time getting it right, and this is again a current hot topic is the tabs example. And I apologize for the noise from outside. So we have the tabs example, and we have actually a tab design pattern in the APG, the Authoring Practices Guide, which was criticized by Simply Accessible, and which is their good right, of course. It's just that we would really like feedback on the APG because, well, in total we might have about 15 people actively working on the specification or on the guide, and we do all the testing, and well, we're only 15 people, so we can't possibly cover all bases, and that's, yeah, I don't like to admit it, but that's just stupid. So we are looking to improve that, but that's hard because that is going to cost money and a lot of time. So I guess that's the usual problem with these things. Anyway, the Authoring Practices Guide is a really good place to look at to look for design patterns, and if there's anything missing, please file an issue on GitHub, and we'll probably get to it, because we really want to make the Authoring Practices Guide sort of the default place to look up how to use aria, because that's its purpose. All that said, though, the first rule of aria is that if you can use a native HTML element or attribute with the semantics and behavior you require already built in, instead of repurposing an element and adding an aria role, state, or property to make it accessible, then do so. This is from the notes on using aria in HTML, which is a W3C note. And, well, given the rest of the presentation, I really agree with this. And yeah, I think one of the main issues with native HTML is that, well, some stuff is really hard to style, and we recently had a proposal for the password role, which would allow you to make any element behave like, or not behave like, but be exposed as a password input field. And one of the reasons this was proposed is because developers are developing or creating custom inputs or password inputs because they don't want password managers to be used. So they actually don't want their users to have a good time and just use their website or web application and use a password manager to log in. And another reason might be, and this is something that Jonathan Kingston brought up, is that you can't use before and after on an input element. So an input with a type of password would be harder to style, which sort of makes sense. Then again, you can just put something around it and achieve the same. But yeah, I don't really agree with the password rule, as in, if the only argument for it is that people or developers are creating these things to circumvent password managers, then, well, password managers are going to work around it, aren't they? They're going to detect a role of password and then fill it anyway. It's going to be the same as with autocomplete, because, well, they work around that too, even if you put autocomplete is off on it. So anyway, I'm rambling a bit. This is pretty much the end of my presentation, and yeah, on the current slide it's you can see my Twitter, GitHub, and website, which pretty much is all my name. So Michiel Bijl on Twitter, Michiel Bijl on GitHub, and michielbijl.nl is my website. And well, you spell my name Michielbijl. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Michiel.
No problem.
I have a question. You mentioned examples like having a custom link, not giving the benefits of, for example, the right-click context menu. And there's various other examples. For example, let's say a dialogue role is not managing focus and keyboard the way that you would expect a model dialogue to do. Now, in the area spec, it's always been made clear that the only thing that it does, and or it's supposed to do at least, is to expose certain information to assistive technology, but it doesn't actually make any changes. But would you feel that maybe it's time that changes, and that, for example, if you give something a role of link, why shouldn't the browser just add the opportunity for that context menu item on there? If you add an area labeled by relationship, why shouldn't you be able to click on that labeled text and automatically move focus to the field that it labels? I mean, why? Right. I think one of the problems that makes aria so difficult to adopt for some developers is that they have to do all these things that normally come out of the box, and why shouldn't the browsers just do that automatically?
Yeah, I actually don't know what the original idea or the original rationale behind that is, but I do know it's changing, because with the new password rule, it does sort of influence how assistive technologies behave when they reach that element. So as the current proposal for the password rule, for example, influences that, as in when you reach it and you start to type, it has to echo the character as shown on screen. So if your password is visible, it will just echo the letters. Or if it's obscured by, say, asterisks or dashes or whatever, it will announce that character. So in that sense, it's already changing. And yeah, like you said, that might be one of the reasons why it's so hard to make aria work. And yeah, on the one hand, yeah, it would be a lot easier if a role or an attribute would influence what the browser or how it behaved. Then again, that would also make the use of aria a lot easier. And while that might sound like a good thing, you also want to promote the use of native HTML. So it's
right. I would think that, for example, the reason that aria is used a lot these days is because the native solution, as you mentioned before, isn't flexible enough style-wise to make it look and feel the way that the developer wants to. Do you think if there was more opportunities to style native components in HTML, that we could bring aria back to only being used for situations where there is no alternative and not just to patch semanticless solution?
Yeah, absolutely. Just look at the quick adaptation of like the new sectioning elements or the landmark elements, like the header and such. Those are very easy to style because they don't have any default styling.
Right.
And well, I guess with the whole shadow DOM stuff, once that gets implemented everywhere and supported, then it should be easier to style HTML stuff. But I do very much believe that if it were easier to style custom or native HTML elements, that their adoption would be greater. And yeah, I do believe that. Yeah.
When it comes to a situation like tabs, it's often the dilemma of, do you go the aria route for tab list, or do you kind of go like the Web 1.0 route where you have like links in a list and you may add some hidden text to indicate that they're tabs and select it? Like where would you stand on recommending a developer to mark up a tab list? Because I've often recommended people to mark it up as an aria tab list, and quite often there's like confusion about now all of a sudden it's arrow key navigation and there's only one tab stop in there, and users get confused, and there's other issues related to it, and sometimes it's just easier to take to the old school approach. What's your stance on that?
Well, I would go with the progressive enhancement way of implementing it. So I would start off with a couple of headings and just the contents of the tab, and then via JavaScript just build on it. So I would expose
markup, or would you just use links and some hidden text to convey the same information?
No, I would go straight from exposing everything, so just showing the headings of just the content of the tabs, to building it into an aria tabs example or code design pattern. So I would go that route because, well, I don't know. It's yeah.
I think one of the challenges with the tab pattern is that to some extent we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. We know that using the aria markup for tabs is confusing to some people, or at least we've got some anecdotal evidence that suggests as much. But then equally, if we don't use the aria, we know that confuses people too, because you're selecting what appears to be a same page link, but there's no indication that it's going to remove some content from the page and replace it with something else. So I think it's one of those really awkward situations where actually it doesn't matter which option we choose, and there are probably really good arguments for either or both or neither. Sooner or later somebody's going to come unstuck trying to use whatever we come up with.
Right, yeah, and that's why I would go from exposing or showing everything on the page to a direct aria design pattern tabs thingy, because that way you sort of, well, you skip the awkward part where it's like, okay, I don't really know what this is, and sure, people are going to be confused because, well, aria is still relatively new, or at least the design patterns are relatively new. So people will have to get used to it, but
well, it's not that.
I still think it's. Sorry.
I think
if people aren't used to it by now, like, then we should be doing something different, because it's been around for almost 10 years now.
Mm-hmm. I think that's probably something worth picking up on. I know, Michiel, in the work you're doing on the authoring practices guide, for the 1.1 version of the guide, you're putting together design patterns and actual working examples of each of the design patterns. And I think that's probably a direct product of the fact that we need better implementation examples for people to learn from. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's correct. But there should also be next to the authoring practices guide, there should really also be a user practices guide, because a complaint I have heard often is that, well, the authoring practices guide is very much focused on or directed to authors, which isn't strange, of course, but it includes all this handy information, like which keys are supported, but then again, that information should also be available to users. So there should be a location where users can just look that up.
Right.
Yeah,
so there should be an equal document to the authoring practices guide that is like the user-based version of that.
Yeah, exactly.
And while we're at it, make an AT implementation guide as well.
Or even perhaps, the education and outreach group at W3C could look at, some educational materials about how to actually use some of these widgets from the AT user's point of view. So
yeah, that'd be good.
If our next speaker is listening, Shadi, maybe an idea to take back to the education outreach working group for something W3C could maybe look at to supplement what's going on in the ARIA working group.
Yeah, and we've also sort of discussed, because the authoring practices guide, another thing with it is that it uses aria everywhere. So even if we have the HTML element available, we use aria because it's the aria authoring practices guide. So it should explain how to use aria. So again, it's not strange, but we also want to promote HTML. So really, there should just be a authoring practices guide, just not specific to aria, but just in general. Like all the design patterns we have, there should be a document which has the native HTML equivalent of those, as far as possible.
I think Steve Faulkner's document using aria in HTML is a good document. It has sort of several principles, the first of which is if you don't need to use aria, don't use it.
Exactly.
Which kind of comes back to this idea of, yeah.
I am very much of the opinion that the guide should follow that that advice, but I do understand why it isn't that way, because it wouldn't really make sense. But again,
yeah. Would you feel that it would be a good idea if the concept of aria moves a bit more away from this idea that we're imitating a desktop environment, kind of this desktop metaphor? It seems a lot of the confusion is coming from there, that, you know, it's not in the situations where aria is being used in the day-to-day websites, it's not really a web application as such. You know, that it's kind of like, oh, it's like a desktop product in your browser. You know, something like Google Docs is a good example of an actual web application, but most sites are just, you know, traditional websites that have, you know, some fancy widgets in them, some tabs and some sliders and some tree views and things like that, some toolbars and menus, but they don't really fit the description. So maybe we should move further away and have more of a hybrid approach to, you know, it's not like, oh yeah, this is a side menu, but that doesn't mean that it's like a menu bar in a desktop product, because that's just a completely different thing. This is a side navigation menu. The same with tabs, you know, like, yeah, these are tabs, but they don't have to behave exactly the same way that tabs behave in the desktop product. So maybe we should support arrow keys and the tab key, so that as many people as possible can feel comfortable with that. What do you think about, you know, moving away from that desktop metaphor a bit more?
I have a couple of thoughts on that. The first one is that I don't think we should move away from looking at the desktop, but we should look more at how touch devices do it, because especially the Authoring Practice Guide has a severe lack of support for touch devices. And this is something we are aware of and that we're working on, but yeah, it's going to take some time for that to trickle down throughout the whole guide. And yeah, I am sort of in the middle, or sort of undecided as to if we should use aria in just regular websites. Because I tweeted a while ago something like, most websites aren't rich, and most websites also aren't applications. So basically what you just said in a couple sentences. So should you really apply aria to a website that isn't an application? And in certain cases it makes sense to apply aria, but in other cases it doesn't. So yeah, I'm really not sure, to be honest. And this is something that I would like to learn from people that use assistive technology. How they experience a website, just any normal website, to look up information or data or whatever. And yeah.
Yeah, we should probably do some more user studies and just, you know, see what people's expectations are. Because quite often you'll be surprised, and like, you could do a lot of work with aria, and the feedback that you'll get is, like, oh yeah, can you make it back the way it was? Because now having navigation doesn't work anymore, because now there are accordion handlers or something like that. So yeah, even though you do the work, it doesn't always mean that, you know, people appreciate it.
Yeah, so there is also a difference between testing a design pattern and testing a design pattern in context. So we recently sort of teamed up with the WordPress testing team. So we're going to send off future design patterns to them, and they're a group of about 70 people with various assistive technologies, or just browsers or systems or whatever, various methods of interacting with the computer. And they're going to test that stuff first and give us feedback, which is good, but it's just going to be on a design pattern itself and not on a design pattern within context. So take the tabs, for example. There's of course a difference between a tab design pattern within a normal website and in an actual web application. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for the interesting presentation.
No problem.
And we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with Shadi.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
All right.
Thanks again.
Let's see what kind of dinosaur suit he'll be wearing. All right. See you in the next stream.